Hey guys, I hope everyone's good today. This will be my first ever recipe video, so here are your ingredients. Please pause to take a picture or a screenshot and we will get started. So I have to dub over my video because when I recorded it, the audio didn't record. So here what I'm talking about is the bowl. Most people who message me say that the number one problem they have when they are making bread is that the dough doesn't rise. And to me, it's because they're probably not using the right bowl. If you're using glass or stainless steel, your bowl is not holding the heat the way it needs to for yeast to be able to grow. So for me personally, I just find a plastic bowl is absolutely key. This is actually an heirloom that's been passed down to me. This is the yeast that I use, Fleshman's Quick Rise. For me, it's just easier. This is already a 5 to 6 hour process for me, so the quick rise is key. But it's important to remember, if you're using quick rise, you want your liquids that you're adding to be hot. It needs the warmth of the water. So what you're going to do is just take all of your dry ingredients and put them all in the bowl. It doesn't really matter what order you put them in. And now you just want to mix the dry ingredients through. You want to make sure that that's well combined so that when you add your hot ingredients, it's already distributed properly so that you're not struggling too much to mix the bread. I always use my hands when I bake. You can use gloves or a mixer with a paddle if that's what makes you happy, but I'm very old school, so I always use my hands. Now what you want to do is create a funnel in the middle of the dough, and you're going to pour in your hot butter right in the middle. The butter can be substituted for oil if you prefer to use oil. It just makes a heavier loaf, I find. So you don't want to mix that through thoroughly. You just want to give it a quick once around, and then you're going to add your hot water. You can kind of put it all in one place. It's not really going to matter. And you're going to slowly bring the flour into the liquid. Don't bring the liquid into the flour. So make sure you're always turning. It's key to baking. And what you're going to find is your bread dough at this point is going to get very sticky and kind of ridiculous, which is why in the beginning the recipe says 4 cups of flour plus 1 cup. You want to keep 1 cup behind for this process because you may not end up needing to use all of the flour in the recipe. You can measure bread the exact same way every single time and your dough may have a different result. So always keep that 1 last cup out. Then pour it on your hands so you can get some of the excess dough off so you can work. And then you're slowly just going to knead, which is bringing the outside of the dough into the middle and pressing. I use the heel of my hand when I do this, and you want to be vigorous. Put energy into it. You want to kind of pump air into that dough. You'll find the stickiness starts to go away as you add the flour. So just always do it in small increments. You'll see now the dough starts to form correctly in my fingers here, and you'll get to a point where you have a nice kind of larger piece of dough in the middle, and then you'll have all these little strands. I'm showing you there that I did have extra flour. I only used about a half cup of that extra cup. So now you're going to clean all the extra dough off your hands. And you're also going to want to clean around the outside of the bowl. You're going to see me do it now in a minute. When your dough is rising, you don't want it to stick to any unmixed mixture on the sides. So you're just going to clean around the edges. After you push into the middle a little bit more, gather those extra pieces. You can see how hard I'm kind of pushing. You really want to make sure that you're kneading this well. Some people use a chair and will push down. This makes it easier for them. Now this is excess dough that will not mix in no matter, what you do right now because it's too dry. So you're just going to put it aside and go back to kneading your dough. demonstrating again how to bring in from the edge and push into the middle. Always turning the bowl. Now here you see me cleaning the sides, which is what I was talking about earlier. You want to bring all that in. You don't want any of that around the edges there. And now your dough is going to form a beautiful kind of bun shape, which you're going to see me pick up here. And you want to kind of just keep gathering and nipping in the middle, because you want this to be as tight as possible. The yeast really needs the heat and the warmth, so you want to try to bring this in as tight as you can. The bottom of it may be sticky, so that's where you're going to bring back those extra pieces. We're just going to throw it right on the bottom, and they're going to absorb any extra moisture that comes out of your bread while it's doing its first rise. So you're just going to kind of make a beautiful little bun here in your bowl. And then this is where my rising process varies from others. Some people will now just cover it with like a plastic top and leave it to rise, but this is like a process that was handed down for me from my grandmother. So you're going to take the parchment paper, and then you're going to take a tea towel, and you're going to soak a tea towel in the hottest water your hands can stand and wring it out. And you're going to place it on top of the parchment paper. And this is going to help keep the humidity in the bowl the right temperature and the right moisture to allow your yeast to grow. So you'll see here now I'm going to put the towel right over top. Make sure no parts of it are exposed to the bowl. You don't want your bread sticking to your towel. Then I have two specific towels that I always use for bread and baking, and were bought for that purpose, but you can use whatever you want. It's not touching the food. So you're just going to cover it up. I use two towels, and then what I do is I put the bowl in the oven to rise. So what I'm saying here is please make sure your oven is off. And then put the whole bowl just in the oven, because this is going to give it a draft-free, equalized temperature environment so the yeast can do what it has to do. You're going to set the timer for 45 minutes, and then you're going to come back to it after that. So here we are, guys. It's 45 minutes later, and I'm going to pull the bowl out of the oven to show you the first step of the process. You're going to want to get a couple tablespoons of butter prepared before you do this part. And you're just going to find the parchment paper underneath and lift the whole thing up in one piece. Fold it in half, put it behind you. You're going to use it again. As you can already see, the loaf has doubled in size, which is beautiful. That is exactly what we want. The next process, it'll rise even higher. When you guys saw that picture where it was like huge and out over the bowl, that was actually a double batch. So this is a single batch that makes 2 loaves, just to make it a shorter tutorial. So now I'm showing you how the dough is all stuck to the sides. As you touch it, it's going to start to deflate. So you want to grease up your hands really good. You're going to give it a punch in the middle so that it can have a base for you to turn and pull. And then you're going to fold and knead just like we were doing before. And that butter on your hands is just going to work into that dough, and it's going to help change the consistency up just a little bit. Flip it over, give it another little punch, and then do the same thing. Always pulling from the outside and pushing into the middle. And turning the bowl and turning the bowl. Make sure you're always working in the same direction. So if you always go clockwise, always go clockwise. It helps with muscle memory as you make this recipe over and over again. So you'll see as I'm folding here, the ends aren't quite sticking to the middle, which is good because it means our butter is nice and worked in through the layers. So we're going to, you see, like this. So now you're just going to try to get those last few pieces in if you can. Don't worry about spending too much time on it. I'm just a perfectionist. Then flip it over. Again, make your bun. You'll notice it's a bit bigger this time than the first time was because the density of the dough has changed. And you're just going to use the rest of that butter and cover the whole thing. And why? Because butter's awesome. So this is an optional step. I mean, if you don't want the extra calories, that's fine, but my family thrives on butter. And once you get that done, you're just going to do the exact same thing you did last time. Cover it with parchment paper, re-wet the towel so that it's hot again, put it all together like you did before, and you're going to put it right back in the oven again for the 45 minutes. Long pause because I'm wetting the towel. There we go. Normally I would have stopped the audio and started again, but because of the programming using, I couldn't. So hooray for first tutorials. So here I am covering it again and putting it back in the oven. And you don't have to do the oven thing. My Nana and my mom, they always put their bread in their beds. Like they lift up their comforter and they put it there. You really just want to make sure it's just in a draft-free, warm environment. So we're going to set to 45 minutes and we will be back after the second rise. Here we go. So you'll notice two pieces of parchment paper there in the back. In the meantime, while I was waiting for this dough, I got my bread pans ready. So we're going to lift the parchment paper and you're going to see that the bread has now, from its original state, has tripled. So you see it's almost touching the top of the bowl. Absolutely beautiful. You can see the little air pockets in the top of the dough. I'll tell you right now, this ended up being a beautiful loaf when we took it out of the oven. Now, you're not going to knead it down. Your first thought is going to be to punch it in the middle and knead it down again. But you need to keep it the way it is right now because we're going to distribute it into the pans. So I always use parchment paper. It's just how I bake. If you don't use parchment paper, make sure you grease your pans very, very, very well. But for me, parchment's just easier. So now you're going to take the bread and you're going to rip it off into equal sections. It should be nice and greasy from the butter. The butter should have risen with it. Now I've been doing this a while, so I can eyeball it and I already know, how much dough I'm going to need. But if you would like to, you can pull it out and put it on a floured surface and you can cut it into equal pieces. What I'm demonstrating here is the roll technique that was shown to me. Basically, you're stretching the dough, connecting the ends, then doing a little shimmy with your hands to bring it in. And that's what's creating a roll. You want to try to make these buns as even as you can. Those nice little air pockets, that's what we want. It shows that the dough is going to be nice and light. I'll be honest with you, bread doesn't always turn out how you want it to, even if you do it perfect every time. So don't be dismayed if it's not exactly perfect the first time. So you're going to put 3 rolls into each pan. Try to make sure they're the same size. It's okay if one pan's rolls are a little bigger than the other pan's rolls, but try to make sure that each roll in the pan is about the same size. So I'm just showing you here, you stretch it out, you put it together, you shimmy, and this is what's creating this nice form. And you're just going to do it back and forth to the ends. You may notice as you do this process that the yeast continues to rise. You may even notice that the buns are rising in your hands because the heat from your hands is going to continue the process. So if you find that some of your buns are a little bit bigger than the others, you can just pull from them and re-roll them. And you're just going to place them in just like that, how you see. 1, 2, 3. I've tried 4, I've tried 2, but I find 3 bakes the best. I'm just showing you here about the air pockets and the layers in the bread. It's nice to see because you know it's going to be nice and flaky, and it can take a while to get those air bubbles. So don't worry if you don't get them right away, but it may crackle and pop as you roll it out. So I'm just taking the last piece here and separating it into two. For those of you who like a snack food and don't think that you would go through 2 loaves of bread in time, this dough can also be used for something we call tautons. And you just take the dough and you break it into pieces and you fry it in a frying pan. Some newfies eat it with molasses and butter. I know my brothers like syrup, but it's a great little breakfast treat to go with your eggs and bacon in the morning. So one more demonstration: bend, fold, wiggle. Now, the reason we didn't knead it down is because this process is basically kneading it, but it's giving it its own individual structure, because what we're going to do is we're going to rise it one more time for another 45 minutes, but we're going to rise it in the pans. The difference in this part and the other parts, the real only difference, is that this part I rise on the stove. I use the excess butter and still coat it and give it that nice kind of top. The butter gives it a really nice flavor. But this part you're going to rise on top of the stove, because if you put it in the oven, it's going to rise up and over and out of your pans. And if it over rises, the loaf will go stale very quickly. So you want it to rise, but you just don't want it to do as much as it did before. So you're just going to do the same process. Put your parchment paper down. Then your wet towel. I don't re-wet it for this part. I just put it cold on top because I don't want it to rise too much, like I was saying. But I still put my 2 towels and I just leave it on the stove. Make sure they're nice and flat and even. Try to keep as much of that air from getting in at it as possible. Set the timer for 45 minutes and come back again. This is a pro tip. If you want to, 10 minutes before your timer is up, set your oven to preheat to 400 degrees. That is the temperature that we will be cooking at today. I've moved the bread a bit closer to the camera because I cooked eggs for my son, so the other side of my oven is hot. But you'll see here as I pull it off that our bread has beautifully risen. You can see those nice cracks from the air in the dough. And it's risen above. And now you can see why I was saying you didn't want to rise it in the oven, because as much as that's come out of the pans, if we would have put it in the oven for the last time, it would have doubled that. So now what you're going to do is you're going to put the pans in the oven, just in and out, up and down, and you're going to set your timer for 20 minutes. What I'm talking about here is we're going to spin these around after 20 minutes. So that's why we're only doing 20. The next part of the clip, I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about rotating. Some may think it's left to right, but it's from back to front. So This is what they look like after 20 minutes. They've slightly started to golden, but you're just going to flip them around. Now, I'm a psycho, so I'm just going to reach in and actually flip them. Just kidding. I don't have heat pain receptors on my hands like most people because of nerve damage. So I just reach in and spin them around. But please, by all means, disclaimer, use an oven mitt. You're going to close it back up and you're going to set it for another 20 minutes. That's just a hot tip to make sure that you wait until your bread is completely cooled before you package it. Because if your bread has even a little bit of warmth in it, if you put it in a bread bag or a paper bag or whatever you're going to put it in, the moisture will turn your dough sour. So you absolutely want to make sure that your bread is 100% cool before you put it into whatever packaging you've decided to put it into. Now for me, one of the reasons I use parchment paper is because it makes this process easier. I grab either side of the parchment paper and I just take the loaf up and out of the oven without the pan. It's just a process I started because when my son was little, he used to always touch everything on the stove. So he wants to touch a hot pan, so it's just how I do it. So I just close my pans back in there, turn the oven off, and I let everything cool off inside of there. But what you're seeing here is two absolutely beautiful loaves of bread. I wish the lighting was better so you could see how golden they really are. It cooked exactly the way we needed it to, perfectly golden brown on all sides. I'm going to put a loaf in the sun here a little bit so you can just kind of see overall. As I said, I don't have heat receptors in my hands, but this is actually very, very hot, so please do not do this. And yeah, so there you go, beautiful loaf. So the way you're going to finish this off now, what I'm saying here is my family likes to break it off in thirds. So you see how I have the 3 loaves? My son will just crack off a piece and eat it. So that's why I cook it that way. So to finish it here, what you're going to do is just take a brush and your butter, and you're going to coat them in the butter while they're still hot. And the bread is going to not only absorb this butter, but it's also going to create almost like a shell so that as your bread cools, your loaves inside stay really nice and fluffy. You don't have to do this process. There is something called towel wetting where you can use like a clean towel and soak it down and then cover the bread with it. But I don't like that process. So it is out there. You can look up how to do it if that's how you would prefer. I use butter for everything because butter is amazing. So yeah. So I hope this tutorial was easy to follow. The next one, I will be sure my audio is working so you can actually hear what I'm saying so I don't have to dub over it like this. But I hope it answered some questions. If you guys have any questions at all on any of these steps, please message me, drop it in the comments, whatever you'd like, and I will look into it. A packaging tip, just for my family, what's easier is when the bread has completely cooled, I separate each one of the loaves out of the 3 and I put them in Ziploc bags individually. So they can just grab an individual bag and they can go. One end of your loaf will get you about 4 to 6 of the store-bought size slices. So it really just depends on how much your family eats for bread. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll try to make some more for the cookies and stuff that I make because this was actually really fun. So there you go. Sparkle's homemade bread.